Welcome to Accelerating Education, a podcast for everyone involved in educating today's kids, especially those who are interested in optimizing educational outcomes. Here's our host, Richard Capone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Accelerating Education. My name is Richard Capone. I'm the host. And today we have with us Dr. Julie Bost, who is a clinical associate professor in the Special Education Department of Ed at University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And also, she is the CEC president. So I want to welcome you, Julie. Welcome.
Yes, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
All right. So we're back. It's the fall. Schools are back in session. So we have a lot to talk about. But before we jump into some of those bigger questions, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Bost, what got you into special education?
Thank you for asking that. So I started my teaching career in the late 1900s as what we call a lateral entry teacher. So that was an alternative licensure pathway. My undergraduate studies were actually in psychology and anthropology, both of which I feel have served me well in the field. This is year 28 in special ed. And I started as a high school special education teacher and then moved into an elementary setting. It was a hospital setting for students with intensive emotional behavioral health needs, and then moved into a middle school teaching position before going into a role as program administrator for about a decade. And now I'm in higher education at UNC Greensboro.
Obviously, you went deeper, and I was going to ask there must have been a personal connection. What sort of made you want to do that?
You know, honestly, I knew within the first week of teaching that it was just, not to be cliche about my calling, I knew it just felt right. I knew it was where I was supposed to be and just continued to pursue it. Changed roles over the year because that's something that I think helps keep me fresh and is exciting to me to learn new stuff and keep mixing it up from time to time. And I've stayed in it for the people and, of course, ultimately for the individuals with disabilities that we serve, and we try to offer opportunities.
I mean, honestly, I think that's a huge reflection on you being genuinely a good person, because it takes a big heart to help some of our most at-risk students. So thank you. So let's dive into it. We're back in school and the fall rush is over. So what are some of the things you've been seeing? And there's been a lot of changes. So as a professor, as a CEC president, you're involved in a lot of different areas. So what are you seeing is happening right now?
So I know we talked earlier about settling down, and I don't truly believe the school year ever really slows down. It may feel like it's settling down, and I think that happens when you have supports in place, so that education professionals feel supported in whatever role that might be: leadership roles, teacher roles, other support personnel roles. But what I see happening, I think one of the most pressing issues is the educator shortage that we're seeing. Although some will argue that there's not an educator shortage, there are a multitude of qualified and dedicated, compassionate people who can and would do this position. There's a shortage of the right conditions for that to happen. So I guess it depends on how you look at that. But when we have a shortage and we have vacancies, others are having to take on more and do more. The turnover rate being high means you're pumping a lot of resources into that could be used elsewhere. Having continuously new staff is very expensive for schools and school districts, for onboarding and lots of other reasons. But ultimately, it's taking energy away from what we're here for, which are the students that we teach. So to me, that's probably the most pressing issue. Caseloads, which can be part of the shortage, but also separate from it, and working conditions. And then also the needs of our students. The learners that I saw in the 90s are different than today. And I don't mean that in a deficit way of thinking or in a negative way, but it's different. The needs are different. The needs are greater. And part of that is because we are more inclusive. Before we're getting ready to celebrate IDEA's 50th anniversary, and before IDEA, many students with disabilities were not given the opportunities to teach. And so now we have more students, more needs, but not the resources that we need to really do what we need to do and to do it effectively.
Obviously, the pipeline of specialists is one thing, and that's sort of a slower moving uh, mechanism, right? It's like, how do you get more approvals? How do you get more people to go get credentialed? But in terms of being able to stem some of the loss, right? Better support teachers so that they don't feel burned out, so that they stay with it. What are some of the things that you're seeing districts do, or maybe what CEC is doing, is to help improve that situation? Because you mentioned a lot of stuff just now. There's a lot of variables. So, what are some things that maybe, if we stay on the positive sides, what are some things that are working that people you see school districts implementing that is helping with that?
So I think the biggest thing is ensuring that teachers feel supported. And a big part of that is understanding their roles. The CEC conducted a state of the profession survey in 2019, and it's in the process of being re-administered so we can get more current data. But one of the big things that resonated with me were teachers saying, my boss or my leader doesn't really understand what I do. So if you don't understand what someone does and you're leading, how do you really support them? And not saying they don't have the capacity to be that leader for that teacher or whatever that educational professional may be, but you really have to understand the role in order to say, okay, here's what that role looks like, and here's the supports to align with that particular role. I think also we have to think very differently about how we provide professional development and networking. I think I'm a in person. I like to go and have professional development in person, and I hope people come to our CEC convention in March in Salt Lake City. Shameless plug, but we know that people are looking for shorter snippets of, and at CEC we're seeing that with our webinars. That is one of our biggest PD offerings right now. We have more people register for that. It's a 1 hour on a topic that is relevant to the field, and the other great part about that is it's recorded so they can watch it later. So what people want is to be able to have a smaller chunk, almost like a micro PD, on the topic that's relevant to them right then, and they need to be able to access it when it's convenient for them. So it looks very different than it did decades ago. But I think if you really want people to feel supported and then they can get the resources they need, we have to think about how to change that and make it accessible to them.
Well, it's interesting. I actually feel like that's one of the things that's underutilized is when you're a CEC member, there's a whole library of asynchronous training that is quite extensive. And sometimes it's almost a matter, I don't feel like maybe enough leadership people know about that. And even them going through and saying, hey, what are the top 20 videos or courses that my teacher should do, especially a new cohort of teachers, right? And that's available today. So maybe some of that is uh, directors taking advantage of that and sharing that in a very methodical way with their teachers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we have a learning library, and then we also have what's called CEC Solutions, where it's more specific and targeted to the specific needs of a particular school or district. But the learning library is vast, and it covers pretty much anything that you would need. And again, it's the 1 hour webinar model.
So that's great. So I think that sounds like a great advice for people to take advantage of that. The other thing about it's interesting about what you said about people don't know what people are doing, and I that's sort of more of an organizational things where people have to be able to share what they do so people
Yeah.
understand it. Because you're right, everyone is so busy they don't take the time sometimes to realize I even see it in our own organization. Sometimes I realize somebody's been doing something manually. I'm like, "You've been doing that way for a year?" I'm like, "Oh my goodness." We could engineer something to take that off your plate, and I think that sometimes, and I probably think sometimes that happens because a lot of special education teachers just get it done, right? They're willing to roll up the sleeves and say, "Hey, you know what? The buck stops with me. I'm gonna take care of my students." But the hard thing about that is it probably leads to a little bit more burnout. So maybe we need to ask, what can I do for you today, special education teachers?
Yeah.
So
Oftentimes, people that are so good at helping are the worst at asking for help or asking for some additional support.
so obviously one of the things, the question I want to bring up too is there's been a lot of funding changes, right?
Mhm.
There's in public education, some more funding is getting pulled away. Some of that is going towards new schools, and there are private schools who are now starting new special education programs. So we see that as well. But what do you like? What some advice would you give to educators who are, maybe seeing a contraction of funding? Like, how can they how can they, adjust for that change?
That's a heavy topic, but I think I know at CEC, one of our major mission and focus efforts is on policy and advocacy and advocating for the full funding of IDEA, which we know will make a difference. We were promised 40% of the extra cost to educate students with disabilities, and I think we're around 13%. So that kind of gives you an idea of the discrepancy there. But I think there are ways to look at how can we best use the resources that we have and support each other and provide that network that we need in order to feel like we're connected and that we have the support to continue because we have to constantly change our instruction to adapt to the changing needs in our classrooms and our schools, and sometimes that need and the resources aren't matching up. So I think it takes very strategic looking at what resources you do have, how to share, how to make the most of them. But
So
ultimately, we need more.
absolutely. So it's interesting. You mentioned that IDEA is having its 50th year anniversary. And actually, I think a lot of people don't actually realize that CEC technically wrote IDEA. They worked with legislators, wrote a lot of the text, and that's what got passed into law. So, can you maybe give us a little background? I don't think people even realize what was education like before IDEA was implemented.
So I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I know that before IDEA, about 1 in 5 students with disabilities went to school because schools were not required to educate students with disabilities. And so now, of course, any student, regardless of abilities, has the right to an education that's free and appropriate and public to them. So it did come about through efforts of people associated with CEC, but also a very big part of it was to other organizations, including parent advocates, families, and caregivers. And so we can't say enough about that and how grateful we are for their efforts, who tirelessly fought for what they wanted for their children.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is people also don't realize that when only 1 in 5 student went to school, what does that mean? It means that eventually those students, it would be a burden, it'd be difficult because other people had to caretake them, and also they weren't taught how to make a living, right? So in some ways, there's an additional external cost that continues past the K-12 range, and I think people don't realize what a cost that was to families and society. So I think what's amazing is when you see students with disabilities, they're being given life skills, right? They have transition plans. They know, they're become contributing members of society, which is amazing, right? Which is so important. I've talked to some people where they had no idea that a
Yeah.
school can just turn your child away or turn say,
Yeah,
no, sorry,
absolutely.
you can't go to
Mhm.
school. Richard's too difficult. We're not prepared to teach him. So
Yeah.
sorry,
I
goodbye.
used to, teach with someone who remembers when it passed, and she remembers driving around with her director, knocking on doors to let people know, "You're please send your child to school." Um, so it's pretty powerful.
Yeah. So what what trends are you seeing nationally now? In terms of obviously a lot of things are changing, right? And there's a lot of technology changes,
Mhm,
political changes, law
mhm.
changes. But what are some of the trends you're seeing now that's affecting special education? Maybe comment on some of the positive trends, like in terms of technology.
Right. So I think a continuing trend, maybe not new, but the use of data and the use of data in a meaningful way and more use of technology to help teachers or education professionals manage all of the data that they have to process, right? Because it's not going to do us any good if it's sitting there. So how can we use that data in a meaningful way for instruction and intervention and positive change, whether it's through MTSS or integrated academic and behavioral systems? Different places call it different things now, but it's basically the basic tenets of it are problem solving and using that data to do that. So I think that's a positive. It's not a new trend, but I do think it's improving. I think districts are getting a better grasp on it, and they're using tools that are available to them in order to do that. I think another one is technology. Assistive technology has been around for decades, but AI is certainly changing the landscape of special education and education in general, well, the world in general. But I think that it is, and I think some people are resistant to that. And that might be due to lack of understanding how to use it. I believe in embracing it and learning about it and teaching people, including myself, of how to use it appropriately. So I've used it several ways in my current role. And if I would have, and when I use it now, I think what I would have done as a classroom teacher with certain AI tools, but I use it to write social stories. If you have a student who maybe is struggling on the playground and join conversations, you can use it to write a social story and discussion questions to help you facilitate that. If you have a learner that is struggling to decode a text and you need to have a age appropriate text summarized for you for accessibility, you can do that. I mean, so I think there's a lot of positive tools. I think people hear it and they think plagiarism or using it to write a paper. Um, but there are ways that it's a positive way, and it's gonna really open a lot of doors, I think, and also not just open up doors for our students with disabilities and giftedness, but also help with that workload that teachers are feeling if they're able to use that to help them be more productive in less time.
That's great. No, I obviously, given my background, I totally agree with you 100%. And I would also say, if people wanted to learn how, of course, there's one thing you hear about these tools, right? You just listed 20 different ways you could use AI or technology, but they could go to CEC and actually find out how is somebody else doing this, right? And you could see examples because there's lots of workshops that teachers are putting on talking about how they use AI to personalize learning in a certain inclusive classroom or something like that, right? Is
Oh,
that
absolutely.
right?
Mhm.
Okay, so
We
people
actually had a
really no, go
panel
ahead.
on AI last year at our Baltimore convention in 2025, and we will certainly have many offerings at our 2026 convention in Salt Lake City in March.
Yeah, that was great. Okay, well, let me ask you a I just a couple more questions, right?
Sure.
So now that we know that technologies are really helping, and I would argue that there's a lot of people sometimes it's still about implementation, right? One of the biggest, I would say, we know what needs to be done sometimes, and yet it's still not happening in some cases. So, what would you say for new administrators? Like, what can they do to really help with the smooth implementation of technology so that it could actually be used properly and boost student outcomes?
I think sometimes less is more. So I think, you choose a few tools. Sometimes we get into the affluent, we want everything, and then you have so much and you're overwhelmed. And how can you use all those effectively? You can't, in my opinion. So I think you choose a few tools that you're confident in using and capable of using, and then you use them consistently and you give it time. Sometimes something's not working, we get rid of it and try something new, right? But I think you have to give with anything, with any intervention, whether it's technology or not, you have to give it time to see if it's working. I think you choose the tools not randomly. They need to be aligned. You need to do a needs assessment. What are your needs within your school or district? And then what technology would be best suited to help you meet those needs? And then invest in it. If you're going to invest in, it can be expensive. So invest in the professional development piece and the coaching piece to make sure that it has staying power and that people are able to use it and then able to maintain it. If it's too complex, they're not going to continue to use it, right? So the simpler the better, in my opinion.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And so it's almost like it sort of goes hand in hand with not having too many initiatives, right? They
Yes.
say if you
Mhm.
have 10 initiatives, none get achieved. But if you have three,
Mhm.
then you can actually achieve those because you just get overwhelmed and you're too split on what to focus on. Um, all right. Well, I'm thank you so much for joining us today. That's given us some really good insight and information. And I know one of the big things you mentioned was CEC, so we're all excited about that. Any other last words you want to give before we wrap up?
No, so I'm kind of winding down my year as CEC president, and one thing that I've I've said from the beginning and even before I moved into this role is that, you know, I really want to offer a message of hope, right? That is just so important to me that people hear that and that they know that there are organizations out there to help support and to not lose hope. I know our work is complex and challenging, but the impact that we have on individuals with disabilities and exceptionalities is so vast and goes on for decades. And the other thing is, put the fun back in fundamentals. I know it can be challenging, but every day we have to work and be diligent in finding something fun, something to laugh about, and letting our students see us laugh and have fun and carry that with them. And that spark of joy will hopefully spread. Part of our mission at CEC is to celebrate and elevate the profession. And I'm very excited that just about 2 weeks ago, we launched our Game Changer Spotlight recognition. And it's a very brief form. It's on our website, it's on social media, and it's a way for anyone to just nominate their colleague in whatever role they are as an education professional, something that they've done that's extraordinary, and then they'll get a little treat sent to them and some recognition. So, just we have to continue to work together, support each other, and celebrate and elevate.
All right. Thank you so much. I think that's a great way to end it on hope and fun. Thank you, Dr. Julie Bost, so much for being on our podcast today.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Accelerating Education is sponsored by Let's Go Learn, maker of K-12 precision diagnostic assessment and instruction software. Thanks for listening, and be sure to check out our next episode of Accelerating Education.